In the early hours of the 8th of July 2024, the 14-year reign of the Conservative Party came to an ignominious end, and the Labour Party were swept into power. The success of Sir Keir Starmer, head of the Labour Party and now our Prime Minister, is arguably more due to the disintegration of the right-wing vote than it is to his own policies or personal appeal. Naturally, that leads one to wonder, who is this man? What is he like? And how he bear the great burden of responsibility that now sits upon his shoulders. Keir Rodney Starmer was born on the 2nd of September 1962 in Southwark, a district of central London found on the southern bank of the River Thames. As we have heard many a time on this campaign, his mother was a nurse and his father was a toolmaker. Both were, unsurprisingly by their professions, Labour Party supporters, and it may be a reflection of just how staunchly Labour they were that Keir was reportedly named after this party's first parliamentary leader, Keir Hardie. Although passing his 11 plus and being accepted to a grammar school, Keir Starmer proved to not be highly academic, only attaining 2 Bs in the C. And it may be the case that he was more caught up in political life, having joined the Labour Party Young Socialists at the young age of 16. Then, attending the University of Leeds and getting first-class honours in Bachelor of Laws, he moved to the University of Oxford for postgraduate studies. It was during this time that Keir Starmer became editor of Socialist Alternatives, a left-wing magazine with radical Trotskyist associations. This has been an area of focus for detractors of Keir Starmer, who would say that he himself was a Trotskyist in his youth, and is likely still a closet Trotskyist today. Whilst he was undoubtedly very left-wing at this time, a look at one of his articles shows someone interested in the kind of bottom-up, self-managing socialism, grounded in democratic accountability and critical of police violence and the perceived capitalist ideology of Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. At one point, he advocated for a 35-hour working week. Not particularly revolutionary, and not particularly radical sounding, but surprisingly moderate for something you would expect from a student socialist magazine. Some have compared it to the sort of thing you would read in The Guardian today. Keir passed the bar at the Middle Temple, then joined Doughty Street Chambers in 1990. What followed was a very conscience-driven legal career, with Keir becoming an expert in human rights law. He would also take on many pro bono cases, defending convicts from the death penalty in several Caribbean countries, and most famously advising on the McLibel case, where Greenpeace activists were taken to trial by fast food chain McDonald's.
The issues raised in this trial are complicated and important in 2 different senses. Firstly, there's the actual details of the case itself, the allegations that are raised and whether they're true or not, or whether they're capable of being proved. But perhaps more fundamentally, freedom of speech. The imbalance in the libel laws between those that have money and those that don't creates a real risk that criticism will be stifled, purely and simply because those without money cannot afford to stand up and try to prove what they say is true.
This, I believe, is the core of Sir Keir's personality. A practical, detail-aware and diligent hard worker, who is mindful of the physical conditions and circumstances under which others work, who then provides his own skill sets in service of those who need help. It all sounds rather moderate, vanilla even. There is a darker side to this, however. Some of the people he defended for free were guilty of truly monstrous crimes. And whilst Keir's intentions in doing so appear to have been pure, they also indicate a certain lack of insight into the character of people. Having been raised to Queen's Counsel in 2002, what we begin to see is a different mode to Keir. What happens when someone like Keir is faced with a tough situation, where the luxury of being compassionate is no longer afforded to him? In 2008, Starmer was appointed Chief Prosecutor and head of the Crown Prosecution Service. In this role, he went from the ardent defender and advocate of the accused to their greatest foe.
It was important for us to show
no regrets.
that there are no regrets. It was very important that we got control of that situation. and showed the criminal justice system could respond.
But a lot of people went behind bars for really minor offences.
But the prosecutor doesn't decide on the conviction. The
No.
prosecutor simply
But
puts
you
the case
decided what to
before the
charge them
court.
with,
And the court then looks at it in the round and says, is that the appropriate charge? Are they guilty of it? And if the answer to that is yes, then it's
You
for
do
the
it
court
again.
then to... I don't apologise for being robust in response to crime.
He would pursue tough sentences against defendants, at times even one-upping his fellow prosecutors in severity.
You'd say, one up, tougher charge.
Yes, we had those cases.
His memory is that you got too tough.
No, he's wrong about that. They were tough charges, but we were facing a very difficult situation.
With ruthless efficiency, and in a somewhat surprising break from his left-wing university days, Starmer also applied austerity measures to the service, getting rid of the most expensive members of staff.
There was the Labour Party on the streets protesting against austerity, and you were getting 5-star awards from a Tory minister inside implementing austerity.
Well, it does mean that I've got first-hand experience of what it means to inflict austerity on a public service, which is why I'm determined we'll never do it again.
His tough management of public prosecutions was seen as highly successful, and upon stepping down in 2013, he was made Knight Commander of the Order of the Bath for his services to law and criminal justice. Sir Keir has been very keen to talk about this time period, and indeed it does the greatest job of marketing his natural strengths: efficiency, diligence, practicality, some kindness, but also the ability to be ruthless when it is necessary. All the skill sets you would want in a manager. Now, I specialise in personality type analysis, and the personality type I would say most clearly comes to mind for Sir Keir is the ESTJ, a type I like to call the practitioner. If there are any personality best suited to being a manager, this is it. But as we will soon see, even practitioners have their weaker points. After all, there is a world of difference between being a natural manager and being a natural leader. And it's in the next chapter of Sir Keir Starmer's career that we see these weaker points start to bubble to the surface. In 2015, Sir Keir ran for Parliament in the safe seat of Holborn and St Pancras, and was, of course, elected and earmarked for quick advancement. He accepted a post as Shadow Secretary of State for exiting the European Union under leader of the opposition Jeremy Corbyn. In doing so, he had to resign from the law firm supporting Remain activist Gina Miller in bringing legal proceedings against the government. Rather than give a strong rationale for why we should have remained in the European Union, Starmer instead lists the themes of collaboration, cooperation and internationalism as important values that should be protected in the future relationship between the United Kingdom and the European Union. This, alongside his acknowledgement of why people voted for Brexit, showcases Sir Keir's value for open-mindedness, considering different perspectives and bringing people round a table rather than going at it alone. But this is also where we start to see what I would call the main thrust of Sir Keir Starmer's style of thinking. Not a radical Marxism, but an intoxicatingly straightforward, unwaveringly pragmatic centrism. And why is it intoxicating? Well, the practitioner type is first and foremost an empiricist. They trust what they can apply and test with their own hands. And in doing so with diligence, they become experts in their chosen fields. Certainly, you would have had a hard time changing Starmer's mind in his area of knowledge and competence. But almost as a matter of courtesy, he exercises good faith in those who, through whichever accepted qualifications, appear to also have expertise. Where the underlying assumptions of a contentious topic are not in plain sight and cannot be referenced in a book of statutes, Starmer willingly accepts the opinions of whatever the experts claim to be the case. And with the experts lining up to say that remaining in the European Union is the best course of action, Keir Starmer knows exactly the appropriate position to take. And here's the issue. When faced with a position that rejects the expertise, that shows, and this is the very important word, conviction against the prevailing wisdom, Keir's instinct is to see this as narrowness, and closedness, something to be avoided, even resisted.
Let us just ask you quickly, you have to choose now between Davos or Westminster.
Davos.
Why?
Because Westminster is too constrained, and it's closed, and we're not having meaning. Once you get out of Westminster, whether it's Davos or anywhere else, you actually engage with people that you can see working with in the future. Westminster is just a tribal shouting place.
It's not that Sir Keir is by any means a staunch Remainer. It's not even that he is a true devotee of the World Economic Forum, as this video may be interpreted. It's really that he's not a staunch anything. He has contradicted himself on this a number of times. On the one hand, floating a second referendum for the Brexit withdrawal agreement, but on the other hand, suggesting that Brexit should now happen, even if he supported Remain as a matter of principle. It's that, in the sheer absence of ideology, the absence of any kind of grasp of a deeper truth or greater significance, the purely practical man struggles to believe in any clear worldview at all. Everything is lost to nuance. Everything depends on the situation. And that can make a person surprisingly malleable to the prevailing wisdom. By the close of 2019, Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party had failed against the electoral might of Boris Johnson's Conservatives. And in the turmoil that followed, Sir Keir finally threw his hat in the ring for the leadership contest, becoming leader of the opposition in the midst of a COVID-19 pandemic. With a firm hand, he put his managerial skills to good use, rooting out the hatred of Jewish people that had grown under Corbyn's watch, and bringing the espoused views of the party back within the Overton window. Despite being elected to oppose the overreach of the government, the man who once advocated for the living conditions of regular people instead chose to encourage Boris Johnson's lockdown measures. With Boris Johnson's downfall due to the blatant corruption that happened during the lockdown, and the spiralling popularity of his Conservative successors, it was only a matter of time before Sir Keir Starmer became the next Prime Minister, and the first from Labour in over a decade. The contradictions also didn't stop, with a young student of the 80s who criticised Margaret Thatcher's violent policing, now complimenting her for her views on law and order.
Then let me tell you, you're right. Nothing is more important, more fundamental to a democracy like ours. The rule of law is the foundation for everything. Margaret Thatcher called it the first duty of government, and she was right about that.
Then there was the interview with Nick Robinson.
Let me tell you what I meant by small, though. You see, in this manifesto, there's a promise on schools, for example. You say Labour will recruit an extra 6,500 teachers. How many extra teachers per school is that over 5 years?
Well, I haven't broken it down per school, to be perfectly honest, Nick.
One extra teacher for every 3 schools.
Yeah, but it's
over 5 years. That's a third of a teacher per school. Let me give you another example. The NHS. Big sounding promise, 2 million extra NHS appointments a year. There were around 150 million appointments last year. So 2 million extra isn't very much. And let me just illustrate that in terms of the budget of the NHS. Big numbers, hard to grasp. So what I've got in here is the NHS budget, 100 pennies to illustrate them. Let's do that. There's the NHS budget. So how much more is Sir Keir Starmer promising? There we are. Not even 1 penny. It's not even 1% of the budget that you're adding. It's a small promise.
The question is, didn't he know this? Actually, I don't think he did. Whilst other politicians may be in the habit of the bold-faced lie, Sir Keir Starmer is more inclined to at least try to tell what he thinks the truth is. He likes things to be factual, after all. Yes, he's aware of the practical realities that the Conservatives have left a financial situation where there is no wriggle room to spend without further inflating the unprecedented levels of national debt. But I think his belief that these minuscule changes could be perceived as a meaningful change is sincere, and reveals that blind spot for Sir Keir, a lack of vision. He is a man who fiddles with ball bearings and believes he has moved mountains. Practitioners aren't visionary by nature. The idea you should embark on some kind of grand mission to change the world is alien to them, and instead the change they often relate to is more of a personal change, one of learning, mastering skills, developing competence, and trying to be the best person they can be. They also happen to be very bad at thinking ahead, despite their greatest efforts. Every action by Sir Keir Starmer mentioned so far has been tactical and logistical. Never has he shown a grasp of a strategic, and this presents a problem. Sure, Sir Keir has proven himself to be able to handle current emergency situations, but if he lacks that long-term insight, how can he know if his solutions will last? There are several historical examples of practitioners meddling in the affairs of their countries, and often having nothing to show for it at the end. But more than this, if Sir Keir is unable to grasp the strategic consequences of his actions, then he could very well bring about the emergency situation in the first place. That's not to call him a reckless risk-taker. It's again more subtle than that. So much can seem correct and sensible in the confines of present-day thinking. Throughout history, the opinions of the experts have held great sway, yet were eventually proven wrong. With each revolution of thought, the next set of experts espouse their raft of acceptable opinions. The common wisdom of today may prove to be insanity through the lens of foresight. Not that Sir Keir, in his earnestness to respect the experts, would know. Another problem for Keir, and one much talked about by others, has been his dullness on the electoral campaign. This is partly a consequence of being a very matter-of-fact communicator, as all practitioners are. The more matter-of-fact you prefer to be, the less natural it is for you to communicate mood and emotion in your words. Showmanship requires a dramatic quality, a little bit of exaggeration, but Keir's flat, factual delivery sacrifices emotional appeal. The lack of a vision or a narrative compounds this problem, with Sir Keir having nothing to offer in his speeches that can inspire his audience. In this, he highlights the limitations of a practitioner, always the manager and never the charismatic leader. The task of having to appeal to a very public audience is, unsurprisingly, a chore for Sir Keir, and there are moments where the strain of it all showed.
When I grew up, my dad was a toolmaker. He worked in a factory. It's true. My mum was a nurse, and actually we couldn't make ends meet.
Without that natural charisma, but troubled by his awareness of the need to somehow fabricate it, Sir Keir has had to find certain sentences and lines to repeat to the crowds, which quickly wear out. The audience's laughter when he, for the umpteenth time, mentions his father was a toolmaker is the understandable consequence of this reliance on repetition. However, it also reveals a final hidden element to Sir Keir Starmer, and one to be found at the heart of all practitioners. Under all the managerial practicality, the ruthless efficiency, the desire for openness and international collaboration, the inconsistency, the dryness, and the total lack of vision, there is also a tenderness, and it is to be found in his close one-to-one relationships. Those family members and closest friends not often seen or talked about in the public eye, except when brought out by a need to make himself relatable.
Looking at last night's debate with Sky News, the crowd laughed when he said your dad's a toolmaker. Why is that? Do you think you've got nothing more to say? Are they getting tired of the same comment?
Let me directly address you on that. My dad worked in a factory all his life. He felt people disrespected him.
Oh.
And
that's not happening with the laughing.
I do want to see this through, because it actually hit a nerve last night.
Yeah.
Because he felt that in the usual conversation, when someone says, what do you do for a living, socially, he would say, I work in a factory. And there'd be a pause where nobody quite knew what to say. And he felt really disrespected. It caused him in his life to withdraw from social engagements. He didn't do it much later in life because it was raw to him that he should be disrespected because he worked in a factory. So when someone laughed last night,
My dad would have turned in his grave. And it's in me. You can see I'm angry about it.
You are
I'm
angry.
frustrated.
The defensive anger that Starmer feels at the audience's laughter shows us how seriously he values his family, and how much the memories he has of his father being overlooked or disrespected has affected him. Not all politicians have a strong private life. Some live for the crowds and neglect their families, unfortunately. But this isn't the case with Keir. Maintaining close relationships in his private life, although not a skill of his compared to his managerial strengths, is nevertheless an area of deep value, and I would suggest an area of great vulnerability for him, in need of support. Keir is someone who, at the heart of it all, needs to have his personal character and the goodness of his intentions properly understood by those closest to him. With that element in his life, Keir can feel freed from the torturous tightrope of public approval, and feel able to speak frankly and openly with those who know he is coming from a good place. And this leads me to my personal word of warning or advice, however you may take it, for Sir Keir Starmer. May he ensure, in shouldering the heavy burden of being the Prime Minister, that he continues to keep his closest ones close, to ground him and keep him honest and sincere. Perhaps now that he has won the premiership, he can afford to be a bit more frank and drop that Ming vase. If not, the pressure on him to keep up the act will prove harder for him to bear than his predecessors. If you'd like to see more videos psychoanalyzing the world's most prominent politicians and other public figures, please subscribe to this channel and click the bell for notifications. There are many more videos on their way, and the next one is going to be covering Angela Rayner, the new Deputy Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and how her personality is likely to complement or clash with that of the Prime Minister. Bye-bye.